Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. And I am absolutely delighted to have Archie Norman, the chairman of Marks and Spencer's. And those of you listening in 123 countries around the world, it is one of the UK's significant companies that we still talk about now. Archie has had a fascinating career, particularly revitalizing major British businesses such as Kingfisher, Asda, Energis, ITV, and now Marks and Spencer's. He also did some work at Coles in Australia, I understand. And he holds a very rare position of being the only person to have been chairman of a FTSE 100 and a member of parliament in the Conservative Party. So Archie, welcome. Great to have you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. And it's a great honor to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I found it very interesting listening to your experiences going through the pandemic, because it hit so many companies so heavily. Am I right in thinking there's about 65,000 members of staff in M&S? I seem to remember seeing that on a post by your CEO.
Around 55 to 65, depending on the time of year, yes.
Yeah. And that pandemic must have really, just as you were trying to turn everything round and make a difference to Marks and Spencer's, must have been a very challenging time. What do you take from the pandemic, and how has it shaped your approach to the business since?
Well, it seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Because we're back to so-called normal, whatever that is. It feels like history, and it's quite hard to remember. I mean, of course, we have two main businesses, food and clothing and home, and they're retail businesses. So you've got to remember that we had a lockdown, but that doesn't affect you if you work in a shop.
Mm.
So our people throughout the pandemic were getting up and going to work every day, especially, obviously, we had a bit of a lockdown in clothing and home, but in food, people are working in the food shops trying to feed the nation. So I thought it was very important in the pandemic that the leadership didn't go and hunker down at home in their conservatory in leafy Hertfordshire or Buckinghamshire. We had to be out there with our people. And I can honestly say I've never done a day's working from home. I mean, rightly or wrongly, I decided that I was an essential worker. I probably wasn't that essential, but I thought the whole leadership team need to be out there. And I think in a crisis like that, if you're part of the food business that has to continue, and customers are very grateful, it's actually quite a fulfilling time. There's a duty and purpose to what you do, which was important for the country, and it's very hard to keep the business going when people are obviously getting ill, or in the factories they're struggling to keep going. And so it was a great time in many ways, an awful time in many ways, but a great time in many ways, because people felt they were really there, perhaps a sort of slightly wartime mentality.
Yeah.
I also think that because for a lot of businesses like ours, it created this moment of uncertainty. So are we going to have to close down for clothing and home? What do we do about the fact we've got hundreds of millions of product coming across the ocean towards us, and we're not going to have shops to sell it in? It forced you to say, right, we've got to batten down the hatches. We're going to do what we need to do to survive, which we did. We stopped, payments into our pension scheme with the pension trustees agreement. We cut our costs wherever we could. We tried to cancel product we'd ordered. We had to do all of that. So rough, tough stuff. But also we then said, look, actually, this is a chance, because we're half going into lockdown. We want to come out of this a completely different business from the one that went in. So all the sacred cows, all the things that we've been worrying about whether we should do or not to do, we had stores that we knew we should close, really, but we've been kept going and worried about the reputation and what would happen. Just said, right, that's it. They're going, they're never going to open again. We're going to move on from that. Even we had overhead functions. We said, look, we're never quite sure about this. Well, of course, in lockdown, half that disappears anyway. So we're never going to start that up again. So I think we had a phrase, never the same again. And
I
that
like that.
was a lockdown phrase. We said, we're never the same again. We're
Wow.
never going back to the state we came into this in. So for us, obviously, that combination of things made it, it sounds the wrong thing to say, but an exhilarating period.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it gives many CEOs that opportunity to make some bold decisions. And I know you've been quite famous for making tough calls. And it's one of the things I wish a number of the CEOs that I knew would be prepared to take such bolder steps. And that has been something you've done. You said at the time, just before the pandemic, or just in the beginning of the pandemic, that you did want to get more out into the digital space. And obviously, since then, you've got this joint venture with Ocado. And interesting enough, my daughter Bryony, who's just had her first baby, and she's about 10 days into it now. But she worked for Hannah Gibson, the CEO of that joint venture that you set up. Very much enjoyed that as her chief of staff, and she'll be coming back after maternity. But that seemed a very exciting venture, and we use Ocado. It's one of the companies that delivers to us every week. That joint venture with M&S. What are you proudest about that, and what else have you done digitally? Because that's the way you said you wanted to meet the market quota. I think was about 27% at that time. But what's your view?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Bryony
Thank
and
you.
to Granddad. And I'm glad to hear she's coming back. But yeah, I've been around long. I find that when you're on the boards or leading very public companies, and most of what I've done has been very public, at ITV or Asda or
Yeah.
M&S, your sort of public property, you get very propelled by the sort of bow waves of fashion and management orthodoxy. So, online prior to the pandemic and actually shortly after was a sort of there was a sort of axiom: if you're not online, you're a dinosaur and you're going to die.
Mm.
That's turned out to be untrue, but it was very much the conventional wisdom. And my view was that, and Steve Rowe, who was leading this at the time, and Stuart Machin, who was running food, our view was that we couldn't take the M&S food business online because, firstly, most food online delivery businesses are unprofitable anyway.
Mm.
So this is more or less a zero profit space. Competing in it is very difficult. You have to be a competitive advantage to do it. And that hinges around your basket size and your customers and how much they order. And so we said, we can't do this ourselves. So the only way we can do it is by finding a joint venture, because our average basket size is comparatively low. We have a lot of small shops that don't even carry the full range. So you can't have a van out the back delivering. You haven't even got the range in the shop. So and I've known Tim Steiner, who's a co-founder of Ocado for 20, 25 years. And I happened to have conversation with Tim about this. And he said, we got this relationship with Waitrose. There's a break clause in the contract that's coming up. It just happens that we might be able to do something. And it was one of those things, we didn't seize the moment. It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And with Tim, we decided we were just going to go and do it.
Mm.
And it was a big thing for M&S at the time. We had to have a rights issue to do it because we couldn't really afford it. So it was a big move. And look, it's a joint venture. I wouldn't say it's all been smooth running. It's been hard yards. We're very different companies. We get along very well, but we do have our misalignments. And there's a bit of rough and tumble, but it's been very good at the time. It was very good for the business because it was a sort of shock wave. It was a 5,000-volt shock.
Mm.
So for the public, M&S is going on. M&S in
Yeah.
the car.
Yeah.
M&S
It was big. It was big.
Part of the thing when you're trying to change companies is you've got to produce those sort of culture-defining shocks, those moments that you become famous for. For a business that never changed and people thought was of the past, we were suddenly of the future.
Mm. No, I think it was a brilliant move. And at the time, we had my mother-in-law living with us, who was slowly dying, and being able to be on the list that M&S and Ocado had of companies that they would prioritize for because she was so ill with cancer and heart disease and lung disease, that we were prioritized, and we always got food for her in the middle of the pandemic, and we've never forgotten that.
Well,
And it's a special one. She's now died, but during that time we were able to look after her and give her some of her special treats that she liked from Marks and Spencer's, things like that, which was really very special. And I had the privilege of coaching a lot in ASDA, and your legacy remained there. I mean, I'm talking a number of years ago, but your legacy remained there, and the leaders that you set up still to this day talk about what they learned from you. One of the things that came across was your quite hands-on experience, the way that you lead by personal example. And as chairman, I get the sense that you feel that you have to lead by example and get stuck into things. Do you want to talk a bit about your leadership style?
I'm not a great sort of fan of the cult of the leader. I think the best leaders are people who enable the team to say they did it.
Yeah.
That got to be very careful about talking about leadership style, and especially if you say, I'm not even a great fan of the expression hands-on. I'm probably is fair, but I don't want people to feel I overshadow the organization.
Yeah.
We had great people at M&S. I mean, the one achievement was to attract great people. Great people motivated the right way. That's why we won. That's why those people went on to lead the business afterwards and lead other businesses. And I like to think the same. We're doing the same at M&S. But I do think that in pretty much all business, but certainly in fast-moving to businesses like retail, the leaders have to live the values. If the leaders behave in the right way, that is powerful. Doesn't necessarily mean everybody else does the same thing. The leaders behave the wrong way, that will negate your culture and you won't achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
So, and I only work for companies that I can believe in, that I think are doing something worthwhile. I'm not going to go and work for a company that I think is creating social harm.
Yeah.
So I need to be able to believe that this is our values, what we want to achieve, and that's going to the way I spend my working life.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think a good company is one where really the top is completely connected to the bottom. In other words, it doesn't matter who you are in the company, you've got a part to play, and you're treated with equal respect. And that means that if you've got an idea or you've got an issue, you can talk to the boss and you can reply to the boss. Not there's a whole load of line managers and middle management who are trying to stop you talking to each other. No, it's not improper for me to go to a shop and talk to the store manager and talk to the team there and raise issues and sympathize with them or offer to try and help get something done. I'm not the person who's going to get it done. I'm going to go and see the team here and they may decide differently, but it's right that I should be there. And particularly when you go to failing companies, and for reasons of happenstance, really, I've ended up with jobs in companies that are not very successful. My job is to make them successful. Failing companies create their own narrative of failure. And if you sit in the boardroom, you'll never hear the truth.
Yeah.
Because the company has learned to shape the truth in a way that's defensive. People don't understand. We're doing quite well, really. It's not, that because of the defensiveness, the middle management has tried to explain away that what is a failure. So you can understand that it's human nature. I'm not critical about it. So the place where you find out the truth is with the customer. And in a retail business, if you have, as we do here, 40 million customers, I can't go and talk to 40 million customers, but I can talk to store managers. They're on the front line every single day. They're experiencing it. They're seeing their customers come into the shop or go away or not come into the shop. So if you inherit a turnover, the first thing you do, you have to set a basic direction because people will need direction. any sense of, you can't turn up and say, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. You would say, we're going to march this way. That gives you the space to ask a lot of questions. And then you go to the front line.
Yeah.
And then you can listen to what, and that, if that's hands-on, that's hands-on, but it's not, you're not hands-on in the sort of conventional
I would call it more leadership by example. And it's interesting that, with terms like the front line and setting direction, follow me, it's almost, with my 20 years in the military, that you've taken some lessons subtly or deliberately from the military about that clear idea of this is our main effort. This is what we're doing. This is the outcome we want. Now let's get leadership at all levels, so people are leading wherever they may be, and particularly those in the stores and with the customers. Any views on that?
See, I think the military example is interesting, and I haven't served in the military, at least not since Cadet Corps, and it's probably changed a bit. We had 303 rifles. But I think that in the modern enterprise, particularly with a lot of young people, you've got to start from the proposition that all work is voluntary. It's an overstatement, but in this country we have roughly full employment. It's roughly true in most parts of the country, but definitely not all, that if you want a job, you can get a job. And you can move for a job, you can get a job. So people work for M&S, or they work for your company because they want to. They're there by consent. And I can't tell them what to do. I don't have an automatic right, just because I'm the chairman or the chief executive, to tell them what to do. Maybe in the military, there's a little more of institutional credibility or hierarchy that gives you that right. But in management, there isn't. Hierarchy is dead. People work for you by consent. And just because you say we're going to march this way, or we're going to arrange the store like this, doesn't mean people are going to do it. No. In fact, often in organizations, the best people don't do it, and your weakest managers do, because what comes from the center is so much the wrong idea. So to build up an organization does work by command and control, you have to have that buy-in that comes from people knowing that the leadership is listening to the shop floor.
Yeah.
And that at the end of the day, the operator knows best. So every big decision is one that people have had a say in. They've had their input to. And then when we decide to turn, we can turn on a sixpence and everybody follows.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I love the way that you established a very powerful bench strength of leaders, whether Alan Layton and other people, when you were in your days at Asda. And I seem to remember you recounting that I think you turned over 95% of the leaders, because you knew you had to, the top leadership, you knew you had to turn things around. Do you want to explain about how you made the call, who the keepers are? That was a Netflix term from the CEO of Netflix, the keeper test. Knowing what you know now, would you keep them?
I believe that behind the vast majority, or not necessarily all, financial failures, there's an organization failure. So yes, okay, there are companies where the technology is just obsoleted, or you're mining a mineral, the mineral price goes down. But for most companies, failure is progressive. It takes years to come about, and it's embedded in the organization. So if you arrive as a new leader, if you want to turn it around, the turnaround is going to take time, and you haven't got much time, and you've got financial pressure. So in some companies, of course, you would say, let's retrain the leadership. Let's give everybody a chance. But you don't have that chance if you're going to run out of money. You'll start making the difference straight away. So that's why my view in those situations is people changing means changing people.
Yeah.
So yes, everybody got it. I said to people when I first went to Asda, there's room here for everybody can pull on an oar. And because I had a team that I had to work with at that time, but in practice, what you're referring to, within the first 5 years, we replaced 190 out of the top 200, and it would have been the vast majority of the top 500 people. And we replaced it because we had to bring in a new culture, we had to bring in new talent, and we didn't have time to waste. And we wanted to fracture the old culture and bring it back, really, not change it, but bring it back to the Asda that it was born as. And, you know, I think we're doing a lot of the same things at M&S, and I would like to think the leadership team that we're growing at M&S will go on to be able to achieve similar things and to lead this business for decades to come. And then we see one of the things you find, you refer to how we select new people and how we recruit people. Basically, when you're on a sinking ship, I mean, people are not swimming towards you. So they're not applying for the job, you know? So it has to, and it was true in the early days at M&S. It's different now. People want, you know, we're very successful. People want to join us, but in the early days, you've got to go out and persuade people, and you've got to recruit people into your culture. So recruitment is a chief executive responsibility.
Yeah,
and that's here. Stuart Machin, at multiple levels, will see all the people trying to bring in, because they are the culture of your future. So you are what you recruit. Secondly, you've got to persuade people to come to a company that's not doing very well and probably doesn't have a great reputation as a place to work.
Yeah.
So to do that, you've got to spin a yarn to start with. You've got to bring them in. And secondly, the trick is finding people who are probably younger or at an earlier stage in their career than that position really warrants, and give them a double jump.
Yeah.
Give them this amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
And people who joined Asda in those days or joined M&S, I would like to think now, that with a bit of luck, we'll give them a searing experience, an experience of intensity where they can change things, they can make stuff happen, be part of a company that's remodeling itself. And that will live with them for life.
Yeah.
They'll take those, because of that intensity of experience, it'll create a habit. It's very rare for executives to change their habits, but it'll change their habits.
Yeah.
It'll give them confidence and experience of making mistakes, of going through the fire.
Yeah.
And then you might create a school of chief executives.
Yeah. Yeah. And wouldn't that be wonderful? And Stuart Machin, your CEO, I mean, a chairman's job is referred to by some people as to hire or fire the CEO, or both at some stage. Was he your choice, or did you inherit him? And how do you see him as a leader? What do you admire about him as a leader?
Well, firstly, I think if my job was just to fire the CEO, then, well, it would be easy money. You know, you hire somebody and put your feet up and see what happens. And so that I don't think that is the chair. I think there's a microbic part of what chairmen do. And my job isn't just to hire or appoint a CEO, it's to make that CEO successful.
Yeah.
And if you look back to the people at Asda, at ITV, at Energis, you know, I've always had huge characters. And my job is to make them win. As chairman, chief executive is something different. Stuart, you asked about Stuart. Stuart is an extraordinary person. He left school to work at Sainsbury's. He started as a trolley boy, chewed his way, probably wouldn't like my saying that, up the management structure, worked at Tesco, was one of the two main operating directors at Asda when I first met him. He joined Asda after my time. So, and then I met him and was with Ian McLeod, responsible for persuading him to come to Australia to become retail director of Coles, which was an Australian failing supermarket at the time. We just acquired it for Wesfarmers. So that was in 2007-8. I think he joined in 2008. And Stuart and I used to commute to Australia, which may sound balmy and probably was, but I did in those days. And Stuart was full on in Australia and served for a number of years there very, very successfully, and subsequently came back to the UK. So when I came to M&S, I said to Steve Rowe, there's one man we've got to get this guy to come and run our food business. And it was Stuart's first of a business like that, managing director role. And after 2 years doing that, he became CEO and then chief executive here. So, I mean, it's a blessing the role in the chairman's like to have somebody who you know extremely well,
Mm.
I have great confidence in, who I enjoy working with, and who has Stuart's extraordinary energy and drive. To have somebody like that who came into the company, and then we can grow into a position where he's ready to take it over. And I believe that, Stuart, because of what we're doing here, and because of there's so much opportunity lying ahead, Stuart has the opportunity to be a generational chief executive leader of the business.
Yeah, and it's lovely to hear such stories. And in fact, we ought to have him as one of your guests on the podcast.
Yeah, you ought to. It'd be much better than me, and a lot more exciting, I can tell you.
Let's get him on. But you've had a very interesting life, being one of the youngest partners at McKinsey, a conservative MP. And we were talking earlier about, and I'm with you on this, beware the cult of the leader. But yeah, I do agree with you as well. There's a subtle difference to having huge characters who've got integrity. In politics, we've seen the likes of Boris and Liz Truss and Trump and the populists. You were a conservative MP in 1997 and saw your time in opposition. Sadly, you never got to be in the ruling party, the government. But what do you think we can do to turn around the disastrous level of leadership in many parts of the British and American politics when it's so needed, so desperate at the moment more than anything? Any views from your time as a politician yourself and a leader in business?
That's a vast subject, Jonathan. And, I've been around the block. So I think I did count the other day. I think I have known 11 prime ministers.
Wow.
Like, they're not all my best friend, but they were people, they would know who I was, put it that way. And so you've seen things come and go. There's no doubt that during our lifetime, we've seen a deterioration in the quality of public discourse.
Yeah.
That's the way I put it, is the respect for ideas, the clash of ideas, the level of quality of interchange, the respect for people in public life, the restraint that people show. In other words, the times when you can do things for political advantage, but you don't because that's not really the right thing. That has changed, and it sounds like a lament, doesn't it? There's lots of good things have happened, but it has deteriorated.
Yeah.
And we're now in a period where if you're not careful in public life, you're driven all the time by the short-term electoral advantage. Say anything, do anything, announce anything to get ahead in the polls. And that's a very destructive mechanic. But in public life, the really successful prime ministers are people who had a North Star,
Yeah.
who had a broad sense, not strategies, what business people called it, but a way of looking at things that allowed them to frame their approach to problems and questions. Because when you're in politics, stuff comes up through the windscreen.
Yeah.
It's not like in business. I know what I want to do. I know I'm going to build it. I've got a 5-year plan. In politics, something happens, and you need to instantly know how you respond to that. Have your moral compass and your idea framework to do that, and then everything gets framed that way. And even today, even after the convulsions of the last few years, I think the public is sort of searching for a maturity, a respect for individuals and people, and a steady hand on the tiller.
Yeah.
And a sense of somebody who wants to drive somewhere. Where they want to drive is important because people want to feel, yeah, I'd like to go there, but that they want to go somewhere.
Yeah. So if you had Keir Starmer with us in the room, I know he's a sort of different leaning to how you were as a conservative, a different party, but you're more broad-minded than that now. You've seen both the good and bad of the Conservative Party, and sadly, I've seen too much of the bad lately. But if you wanted two things from Keir to help, he's talking about growth. to help business like Marks and Spencer's to do better, if there were a couple of things that he could do to really help businesses thrive and more jobs and things like that, what would you ask him?
Well, I wouldn't ask him. I'd tell him. But which I have. By the way, I have had that conversation. I mean, not recently, obviously, but must have been a year ago.
Did he listen? Because, did he listen?
Oh yes, I do think a lot of politicians don't listen, but I think his background, his legal background, and so on, means that he is, to some extent, he's got an openness to ideas. I mean, if you're a lawyer, that's what you do. You read the brief, you move from situation to situation. I think he does have that quality. And my attitude is I'm a conservative. My framework of ideas is about individuals and individual freedom. I believe fundamentally that allowing people to keep their money and spend it as they wish, and building continuity in communities and long-term basis of cultural cohesion. That's what I believe in. But I do want government to succeed.
Yeah.
So I think even when I was in politics, I thought being so partisan that you wanted to make government worse was a bad idea. Now, I remember when I was in the first year, we stayed up all night. There's a Conservative Party. When we'd gone down to the worst defeat for a century. So we weren't going to win any vote. Like we had on 64 MPs. It was like now. We were never going to win a vote. In those days, you have the ability to protract debate. So we decided that we were going to make the government stay up all night to debate the minimum wage. We were, as a party, totally opposed to the minimum wage. We now decided it's a very good idea, by the way. Like most of things, it's one of the things you learn as you're going to move on. But there we were. And I said to the chief whip, who's a good friend of mine, James Arbuthnot, I said, why are we doing this, James? There's only 164 of us. The Labour Party has sent half their people home to bed. No, we're going to lose. What's the point?
Yeah.
Nobody's listening. They just think this is weird. And he said, oh no, he said, you've got to understand, we're wearing the government out. No, and I said, no, actually, we're wearing us out.
Yeah.
They've gone home. And I said, why is it a good thing to wear government out? It may be a Labour government, but I'd like them to get some rest and be competent.
Yeah. So what are the two things? What are the two things you'd like Keir to do?
The first thing is that at the core of the British problem is an economic problem, which is our productivity is flatlined for 10 years. So why does that matter? Because that's our earning power. Productivity is income per head. So if your income per head is flatlined, GDP's gone up, but we've got more people than we had. So flatline, people are not better off. They can't afford a better holiday or better food or whatever they want to spend money on. So alongside defence and security and justice, growing people's well-being is a duty of government. So we have to, now the point of productivity doesn't come from spending taxpayers' money or putting up taxes. It doesn't come from social policy. It comes from attracting investment, embracing new technology, building skills, and the educational standards to adopt those skills, and creating a great environment for entrepreneurs and people who create wealth. That requires what we call now an industrial strategy. Mm-hmm. Now, I slightly wince at the expression industrial because it conjures up this image of us building steel mills or something. What was the way of saying is governments have to know how we're going to compete. Because in France, in Singapore, in the US, you've got governments who are deliberately trying to excel at certain industries, embrace certain technologies, really fuel the skills and ability to win in AI or whatever it may be. We don't have that. And Conservatives, we had in 2016 under Theresa May, I was part with Greg Clark, who's the Secretary of State, developing our first ever comprehensive industrial strategy. Boris then binned it.
Yeah.
He didn't like the idea. And that was a sort of tragedy. And I think this is what Keir, when they talk about growth, it can't be a rhetoric. There's got to be a plan.
Yeah.
Growth comes from investment, from skills, from entrepreneurs. So you've got to know how you're going to do that. So that would be, the first thing I would say to him is that's what I have said to him, and I think that there's some receptivity.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talked about wanting government to succeed. When I've been listening to Fiona Hill's account of "There's Nothing for You Here," and she worked in Trump's administration. She grew up in County Durham, Bishop Auckland, and she was saying that Trump deliberately during her time there in his administration. It's interesting why she was working for him, but she chose to until she got removed for a couple of years. Now I think she's the chancellor at Durham University, but very interesting lady. But she was saying that Trump wanted to destroy the government, the federal government, and diminish the value of people who gave to help that.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and because Trump's an extreme version of that. But there's grown up on the, want a better word, the sort of populist right, and you see it in the Conservative Party. Because of the impatience with state institutions and some understandable impatience, has grown up this idea of sort of creative destruction. We've got to tear down the traditional ways. It's important to sort of fracture the civil service. The negativity around public institutions. It's a very unconservative thing, but it's an idea that's half adopted by the populist right. And I think it's quite destructive.
Yeah.
Now, I think that you've got to remember, government isn't just elected politicians. It actually is having outstanding civil servants, great permanent secretaries. It is people who run our public institutions, whether it's the NHS, whether it's acute hospitals, etc. And in a good country, people are attracted to those roles. They're never going to make amazing money personally, gain out of it, but they're attracted because of the vocation, because the ideal of it. And when you start to attack all those institutions and degrade them, and prosecute them, and it's so negative, then you lose that flow of leadership. A great country is one where men and women of ability and of achievement want to spend part of their career in public service. And we've got to think about, why are we creating a country where that's going to happen? Now, I was the only, you mentioned earlier, FTSE 100 chairman to serve in the House of Commons. There'll never be another, by the way. At the time, half my peer group, other business leaders, not half of them, most of them said, "What are you doing that for? You must be mad." But I felt, I think you've got to take the time God gives you. And I was blessed to have this opportunity. And we ended up losing. We went down to this catastrophic defeat, and I was in opposition. But I don't regret doing that. You take that was the chance that few people would ever have had. And it's a massive change to my life. But I did. That's what I did.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting that, taking those opportunities that life gives you. And I was just thinking about your fascinating life that you've had, your time at McKinsey. You went to Harvard Business School, I understand, was it a couple of years you were there? And all the things that shaped you. What do you think when you look back over your early years? What were the things that shaped you the most into the person, the leader you are today?
Well, I think we don't like to admit it, but we're all, at least 50% of your shape is defined by the time you even got to university.
Yep.
The very important thing with me, I'm very aware of, is that, and I was one of 5 brothers. My father was a doctor, and my mother was a doctor, and actually my grandfather was a doctor. I think the great-grandfather, one of them was. I was brought up into a professional household. My father was consultant pediatrician at Great Ormond Street, and he worked I mean, he worked late hours. I mean, he was in the NHS before there was an NHS, and most Saturday mornings he would go to the hospital. But it was normal, and his attitude, he always felt he was short of money, but he never talked about money, which wasn't part of it. You were paid and so a bit of me, my approach to management is what comes from that. I think I'm a professional. I'm a hard hand. I'm here to do something worthwhile, to make it work for other people. I hope that I get paid as a byproduct of that. And I think it's hard work. I don't think you get anywhere without. I know it's unfashionable now. We're all working from home or 4-day weeks. I'm afraid you want to get ahead. There are geniuses. I'm not one of them. I have to work hard at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think that continues. See, when McKinsey in those days was a fraction of the size it is today, probably 10% of what it is today. It was small, but it was quite, and probably the culture then was a rather distilled version of what it is now. I don't know. I'm not part of it.
Did you go there from university? Was it Cambridge you were at?
I went from Harvard. So I went to Citibank, and then I went to Harvard Business School for 2 years. The Harvard Business School was a sort of foundation moment for me because it was the US, and you went there and people were there like it was about business. It was unembarrassedly about free enterprise. The Harvard rowing crew rowed with dollar signs on their oars.
Yeah.
Which in America you didn't think was embarrassing. Yeah. But and probably it was. But my point is this: is that the basic philosophy at Harvard Business School, and I'm probably parodying it, is that you can't read a book on management. Management is about accumulated experience, seeing lots of situations and believing that every situation is capable of intelligent analysis, of breaking down. It is possible to find the right solutions, but you do that by looking at that situation. So it was and still is pretty much 100% case studies.
Yeah.
We didn't read a book. And so to try and bring people through an accelerated experience where they see multiple situations and debate them and accept that it's always capable of analysis, but there's no right answer. Management is a series of judgments, and it's about leadership, of course. So that I think that, and then going to McKinsey, which was this sort of not a bit like a religious order, very strong set of presumptions. The heart of the McKinsey ethos then, and I think now, is that they were a professional service firm, and professionalism in McKinsey meant something very special. And essentially it meant that you're not here to make more profit for McKinsey. You're here to serve clients first. So when I was a partner at McKinsey, you weren't allowed to charge more than your per diem rate. Wow. You could charge less. So if you felt you weren't delivering value, it was okay to charge less. Probably your partners would want to know why that happened. But you weren't able to say, oh, they'll pay double for this, I'll charge more. Because you're there essentially to deliver outstanding value for clients. And it was a professional service firm. And Marvin Bauer, who was the author of all this. So that, for me, coming from my household, with basically parents who were National Health Service doctors, through to Harvard Business School, through to McKinsey, that really frames the way I think about and look at my role and business today.
Yeah, and I found it fascinating reading about Marvin Bauer and how McKinsey was formed. And I met a wonderful man, Brigadier Harry Langstaff, I think.
Oh, Harry Langstaff. Harry was the youngest brigadier in the army.
Yeah.
It wasn't when I turned up, because he was about 60, because he'd been McKinsey he went into McKinsey, and he was the sort of HR director, if you can call it that, of London, and he was a bolt upright. You could tell he was a brigadier. But he was the life and soul of McKinsey, actually.
Oh, fascinating.
Wonderful man.
Yeah, he made a big impact on me because I went just to get his advice. Someone recommended I sought his advice. and I'd left the army, and so I was really too old to join McKinsey according to his rules. But he said, "Look, let's have a chat." And we got on very famously. He put me through the process where I had to do various tests, but because I'm dyslexic and have dyscalculia, when it was okay, last year Tesco made 42.75 million. This year they're going to make 13% less. How much is that? And I went, "Oh, can I have a calculator?" No, no, in your head, in your head. And so yes, I didn't tend to pass the test, but I love the organization and I've always
No,
admired.
funny enough, they had, I can't remember what it was called, the alpha test for them. They had this test of verbal and numerical reason, which a lot of very clever, distinguished people didn't pass.
Yeah. And I'm not clever or
One of
distinguished,
whom
but I didn't pass.
I know there was somebody who I interviewed, and I thought they were terrific, and they went on to become a High Court judge. A very distinguished barrister, but he couldn't pass the numerical reasoning. But that was it in those days. And remember, this was a company where not very long before I joined, everybody had to turn up to work in a white shirt with a bowler hat.
Yeah. Wow.
Under Hugh Parker, and lucky the bowler hats had gone before I turned up. But we did. Most of us wore white shirts. Yeah. We always had yellow writing pads and white shirts.
Amazing. No,
we didn't have. Well, when I first joined, shows how old I am. You didn't have a computer. There was a calculating machine with a handle you turned. You want to multiply by 8. And then if you were really clever, you wrote a program and took it to the computer team who had what they call a mainframe. And they were programming it into the mainframe. Fantastic. That was the cutting edge.
Yeah, that is amazing. I know, and a great experience, I'm sure, just like Harvard was and the various other organizations. Look, we're coming towards the end of your time. I'm conscious you're a very busy man. But before we end, I'm going to end with, in a minute, get you just to briefly, as a piece in itself, introduce yourself and share your top leadership tip, a practical tip that served you well and people you work with. But before that, I'm just interested in a question on health. You seem to be very healthy. What have you done, or what do you do by way of a sort of routine over the years to keep yourself able to keep up the pace of what you're doing when many of your peers have retired and are very unhealthy and have got illnesses and ailments? What do you do to keep healthy mentally and physically?
I mean, first, I think, a lot of people, I would say health is genes times luck. So, your makeup and your gene, I'm a certain kind. I'm lucky my parents were well to a late age, and maybe I've been blessed with some of that, and then you're lucky to avoid stepping into an illness or whatever. So thank God I'm still here, still around, and still throwing the punches. But I think my attitude is, firstly, that I enjoy work. I think it's very important to be mission-led. I think once you lose your purpose, that's going to affect. I do think that affects your health. I actually think it's a good thing to have adrenaline. I think it not just keeps you alive. I think it's good. It's not a scientific point, but it's good for the heart. And I used to say, but I've stopped saying now, that it's important to be scared once a week. I don't mean scared. I mean, it's important to have a moment once a week where you think, crikey, you've got to have that moment of intensity.
Yeah.
So what keeps you alive? I think, everybody has their different way. And I have friends who are retired and very well and very happy. I don't think I'd be very good at it. There's lots of other things I could do. I'm not a complete monomaniac, but I'm not going to sit down and watch breakfast television, put it that way. And then I think you have to try and eat. I don't have many excesses. I probably do have some, but I'm not going to tell you about it. But I think you have to be modest. My father ate like a sparrow. I don't eat like a sparrow, but I try and it's not something food and drink and sitting around and going to events isn't important to me in life.
Yeah.
Friends are important. Places, to some extent, places that have been with me all my life, and that I care about, and of course family.
Yeah.
And what I do, I like to think that people, I can, when I leave M&S, I don't want people at M&S to talk about me anymore, but I'd like to look back and they'll all say, yes, he helped us achieve something.
Yeah. And in fact, that's a nice sort of penultimate question just before we go on to your top tip, which is, you've been there since 2017. What do you consider to be the most significant achievement that you and the team you have achieved through leading M&S through the challenges, the pandemic and things? What are you all proudest of?
Look, I don't think it. Firstly, I don't go around being proud of things. What matters is whether the business works and works for the people who work in it and works for the shareholders, and whether that's a complicated thing because it's a function of our product and our value and pleasing customers. I came here to change the business. So this was a business that hadn't fulfilled its expectations and those of its shareholders, but also the British people for 25 years. It had very good people here, including people who did an outstanding job. Stuart Rose was here, did a period of time a great job, and it sparked to life, and then it sagged back again. So it wasn't 25 years of linear decline. People had to go. My job was to change that and change it permanently.
And do you feel you have?
No, but I think I'm on the way. I think we're on the way.
On the way.
I'd never say we've done it. That would be, a complete. I would never say that.
Work in progress.
I think, and it's a source of frustration that after nearly 7 years, I can't tell you we're there. It's been slow, but yes, I do think that with the team we have now under Stuart's leadership and the executive team, we're on a path that will be irreversible. And we're creating the M&S as it should be for the next 100 years.
Fantastic. Well, that's a perfect moment just to then give your top tip. And the way that the others do is if you just kindly introduce, say who you are, what you're currently doing, and share with us your top practical leadership tip for the leaders around the world to listen to.
Okay, I'm Archie. I'm Archie Norman. I'm chairman of Marks and Spencer. I don't think leadership can be bottled into a phrase, so I'm not avoiding the question. But I think I'm wary of the question. I think my tip to people in leadership is be humble, listen first, live to the values, and work hard.
I like that very much. Well, look, Archie Norman, thank you very much indeed for taking time out of a very busy schedule to be on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. It's been an absolute honor. And I look forward to having your CEO, Stuart, as our guest and as your guest sometime in the future if you mention it to him. But thank you once again.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.